Except for Peter.
Peter. So last time you were talking about one can't get anything, right? And that I was making the mistake here. I had some sense that it was possible to get something. Right? So, if it's not possible to get anything, well, actually, maybe you could just talk a little bit about that. Is it not possible to get anything because, like, everything is already fully present? Like, it's only like one can only imagine something that that is separate from what is already here, or something like that.
Yeah, there's only one thing that's actually present. And you already have it and are it. So there's nothing to get, there's nothing to lose. Mind you, in conceptual terms, you can imagine yourself as getting and losing all kinds of things as the, as the energy patterns are continually shifting. But there's nothing actually there, to have objects or situations that have any stability. They have to be abstracted into existence because they don't actually exist. So you can't get or lose anything like that because they don't exist.
So when one can only kind of get oneself or get realization of the fullness of I don't know, one's present experience.
No, you already have that. You can't get that. You can't lose it.
And there is a matter of being open to one's experience, or being welcoming, or surrendering. No?
That's all pretense. It's all imaginary. It's all mental games. Experience is completely present, and you can pretend you're open to it or pretend you're not open to it. But here's experience. Try and close yourself. Try and open yourself.
But there's a way in which I can sort of delude myself to imagine that like this that I'm experiencing, or I'm not experiencing some portion of my experience.
Sure, you can delude yourself to imagine anything. It doesn't make it so.
So well, then I want to talk about like attention. Like it seems like attention is withdrawn from some portion of my experience or something.
What do you mean withdrawn? In what, when?
It's like, I don't know, like if we're talking metaphorically, like the aperture of what I'm present to is like this, but then it could be, or essentially it is completely open, but it's like I delude myself into imagining that it's restricted, or like like I was just talking to Sophia about like, okay, so maybe I've got an injury to my foot or something like that, right? And then I can't quite feel it, or it's like it it seems like there's not full awareness of that. Like it seems kind of numb or something like that. But maybe I work with like a body work or something like that, and then there's more awareness to. It's almost like my experience of that aspect of my experience, or my
it's
awareness
not
of that.
right. It's not more awareness. There can never be more awareness. There can never be less awareness. But there's this very peculiar phenomena of apparent focus of attention, which is inscrutable. You can't pin down exactly what that is or how it works. That happens spontaneously. That can seem to present as all sorts of degrees of narrowing and expansion and focus and lack of focus and all sorts of things like this. But in the occurrence of that, nothing is actually coming in or out of focus. So say conditions are out of focus. Say you're staring intently at me and the whole rest of the room is out of focus in your field of vision right now. Out of focus is the absolute present intimate attention that it has. It just seems to be presented with that kind of a texture. So you don't actually gain or lose anything. Say you're staring through the aperture of a telescope, and you're completely absorbed in that, and you're just seeing this one tiny star up in the sky, and you're completely unaware of anything else in your experience. That is what the totality of your experience looks like. There's never anything missing. There's no objective scale. There's no objective size. There's no bigness or smallness. It's like a dream. Suppose you dream you're in a small room, and you're worried about you're missing the rest of the dream. There's nothing outside the room. The small room is all that exists because that's what you're dreaming. And if you start dreaming an outside, all of a sudden there's an outside there. But your dream hasn't expanded. And all of a sudden you start dreaming, you fly out into space and you're in the middle of galaxies and light years and this and that. Nothing has expanded. It just is presenting with a different implication. But the dream is not any bigger than, the dream wasn't any smaller when you were stuck in a tiny closet. Because there's no objective reference.
Yeah. So in this situation, like I'm focusing on you, and like I imagine that that if I were to focus on something at the periphery, right, then that would I would get that thing more, right?
Yeah, but there's no thing there because there's no objective frame of reference. Attention reifies. Attention makes something seem to be more present, more actual, more defined. But that's just a presentation. There's no thing there to become more or less defined. It's like, when you're in your dream, you're in the little closet and you open the door and all of a sudden you're you're out in a vast panorama on the top of a cliff over surveying, thousands and thousands of square miles. It's not bigger, it's not smaller. You haven't gained anything, and you haven't lost anything if you go back into the closet, because there is no actual scale there. There's a presentation that implies, it may imply scale into to an interpretive framework, to interpretive mentality. But there's nothing that is actually like that.
But the next thing that sort of comes to mind is like cities, and like it's like in that, like I think I understand what you're saying about like objective scale, like I have a value judgment on something that is in my experience, or that I imagine is not in my experience, that would be better than my experience.
Right.
And so I'm sort of deluding myself into interpreting my experience as being lacking, right? Or some aspect of my experience, right?
Yeah, well, you're imagining it, whether or not, if you want to define that as deluding.
So I guess I'm doing that now when I imagine, oh, well, if I have like a bunch of training in such and such, maybe I would have an extension of awareness and be able to, like for example, like a wine taster or something like that, or a food taster, who goes through a certain training, and then they can articulate particular parts of their.
Right.
Yeah.
But even in that case, nothing has been gained. Say you're a tone deaf clod, and you go to a musical performance, and it's just a lot of noise to you, and say you spent 20 years with hardcore investment in music appreciation, and you study instruments, and you study music theory, and you go through your training, and you learn to sing and play music to yourself, and all of a sudden you go to a similar performance, and it's this amazing, detailed, elucidated, multidimensional thing, but you haven't gained anything. It's just a different implication of presentation.
Well, what do you mean a different implication of presentation?
Here. Close your eyes. Hold your thumb up in front of your face. What your thumb looks like. Now open your eyes. What your thumb looks like. Nothing changed.
Uh-huh.
So the presentation is different. And so presentation is infinitely mutable. And it can seem to be mutable by all sorts of circumstantial apparent means. But whether or not those are actual means and actual causal relationships over time is only definable theoretically, it's only definable as an abstraction. So say you go through that whole scenario, like I said, where you're tone deaf and you go to the show and you spend 20 years and blah, 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 and then all of a sudden you're really, it all lights up for you. So now say you dreamed it. Say you dreamed your tone, that whole scenario. Have you gained anything? Have you lost anything? It's just an apparition of textures that seem to imply a certain thing, and then seem to imply a certain development, and then seem to apply a different kind of a thing. But there's no more or less of anything. It's just different. And the very nature of what is here is that it can and does present as infinitely differentiated from itself, with no repetition. But what is here does not increase or decrease. The implication of the way it seems to be presenting itself, in terms of detail or lack thereof, in terms of whatever sort of apparent parameters seem to be presenting in terms of the experiential flavors, are just instantaneous presentation, just like in a dream. You just dream it into existence in the instant. There's nothing actually being gained or lost. There's nothing actually happening or not happening.
And your experience of the world before and after your opening was the same?
What do you mean the same? Same as what?
Same before and after. You woke up with, seemed like your head was, or the top of your head was gone.
I came to see the way, I came to recognize the way this is without misinterpreting it, that's all. Nothing changed.
Yeah. And it's not like that, that's very different from like going through the 20-year training, so I can talk at length about how wonderful a symphony is. Right?
Not necessarily.
No?
No, not necessarily. It just looks that way. Misinterpretation is just an apparition, and clear seeing is just an apparition.
Yeah.
Nothing is gained, nothing is lost. There's no difference whatsoever.
So your city of being able to bullshit about what's going on spiritually and articulate things and so on, right? It is not like that was arrived at through training?
No, you can't say. You can have all sorts of theories about that. You can have theories about anything, so all you can say is it looks like that. And that's one theory about it, but you can have a million other theories about it. What is here is entirely unresolvable, which means uninterpretable. So you can't say what's happening, you can't say how it's happening, you can't say if it's changing, you can't say how it's changing, you can't say whether there's development or whether there's degeneration or whether there's this or whether there's that, because to do so accurately, you would have to be able to resolve what some condition is, and no condition is resolvable. Do you understand that? Can you see what I mean by that? That no condition is resolvable?
Yeah, like, well, so what it seems to me like, I can't articulate with any sort of clarity what's going on about anything. So that's irresolvable, right? So
sure.
That's the same sort of irresolvability you talk about?
Well, that you can't is an abstraction. That there is anything to have clarity about is another abstraction. I mean, everything that you put as a positivity, a positive statement, let's say, is an abstraction which is unverifiable because of the inherent unresolvability of what's here. You can't know if you're clear, you can't know if you're unclear. And in fact, there's no such thing as clarity or unclarity. Clarity is equally unclear. Unclarity is equally clear.
So it's like I put forward first some idea, some abstraction that it's possible to clarify whatever.
Sure.
And then I measure, or I try to measure against that assumption.
Right, sure.
What my experience.
Yeah, it's all a house of cards. It all exists in your fantasy only. And if you look at the actual basis for that interpretation, the experience, you can't say what's happening. what seems to happen is it may be infinitely pregnant with implication, but none of the implication resolves to precision or resolves to specificity. I mean, the strongest you can put it is it seems like. But as soon as it seems like this or it seems like that, you're jumping into abstraction. And even that seeming is of course an abstraction, because you can't say what seeming is, it's unresolvable. But we can say perhaps intuitively or experientially, there sure seems to be a lot of seeming. There sure seems to be a lot of implication.
What about like vibing with another person?
What about it?
So there's a sort of, I guess it's the same sort of way where, like I think I am connecting with a person
Sure.
at a deep level or something like
Sure.
that. You know, so it's again I have this idea, right,
Right.
about what it means to be connected.
Sure.
Right.
But you can do what feels like connection, but you can't know for sure if it's actually a connection. You can't know for sure if there's actually another person. And yet you're free to participate in that kind of energy engagement, and you're free to interpret it any way you want. No harm, no foul. It's not like interpretation is evil. It's just wrong. It's inaccurate. There's nothing wrong with interpreting. You can't stop the mind from interpreting. But it's always inaccurate. It's always wrong. There is no such thing as an accurate or a true interpretation. Because what is true, what is actual, is inherently and absolutely and ultimately unresolvable. You can't pull it together into being precisely a certain way or this way or that way or whatever. And so as soon as you do, as soon as you say, oh, this is this or this is that, you're jumping into abstraction. You're not talking about the actuality anymore. You're talking about a pretended resolution or determination of what it is, which cannot actually be done. It's like saying what happens in a dream last night. What happened in the dream? It was a dream. How can you possibly? Nothing happened. It was unending weirdness. And yet the mind is very powerful, being able to collapse it down and say, oh yeah, I was in this room, and then somehow that turned into being on a boat, and I was talking to someone, and then somehow there was a squirrel there. And so you turn it into a narrative that being put as a narrative makes it sound as if it's kind of precise. Oh, I dreamed about you and we had this conversation. But what really happened wasn't like that. Because dreams are manifestly unresolvable. So-called waking state is manifestly unresolvable. Not the waking state is unresolvable. You can't say what. You can't, and you can never say what is happening.
Well, so how can I stop myself from just falling into a delusion, or like it's just.
You don't need to stop yourself from falling into it. Just see that it is delusion. When you go to a movie, you can go and get lost in the movie, but you know it's a movie. So any and everything that you think is happening is like a movie. And you're free to participate in that and approach it that way all you want, and it can be very enjoyable to do so and interesting. But it's not actually, none of that is actually happening. So, in practice, from the point of view of the yogi, it's almost like a kind of a schizophrenic experience, where on the one hand, there is, the mind's endlessly spinning off all of these interpretations, and theories and hypotheses and then getting lost in them and participating and orienting to experiences if it was this way or that way and so on and so forth, which we're all completely familiar with. But what that actually consists of, and the context within that actually occurs, is this completely explicitly present actuality, which is not like that. I mean, they coexist paradoxically and weirdly and unresolvably, of course. You know, in Buddhism, there's a saying, you know, samsara is nirvana, nirvana is samsara. You know, that's the principle we're talking about.
In short, don't believe anything you think.
Yeah, that's all.
And all experience is just experience.
Yeah.
There's no better or lacking.
Yeah. Wise words.
Yeah, I learned from the best.
So it's like, it's, when I'm getting lost in a delusion, and can't somehow step out of it, so the analogy, it seems like, you know, it's like the sort of person who tries to say something about God, like say, oh, God is, you know, this sort of thing, you know, right? Or like the limit being like, oh yeah, so there's this text, right? And it's the words of God, right? But it's like I'm trying to make sense of what can't be made sense of, and that's because like I invent I first invent the idea that things could be made sense of. Right?
Well, first you invent the idea that there are things, and then you invent the idea that they can be made sense of.
That my experience can be made sense of.
Sure.
Yeah.
And you started off talking about how you get lost in these things. You're never lost in them because you're never actually in them. They are in you. Interpretation happens within the experiential field, not the other way around. You never leave the experiential field, and what seems to appear within the experiential field is within that. There's a subset of that, not the other way around. You're never lost in a dream because you're never in the dream. You're the dreamer. The dreamer never gets lost in a dream. It can seem that way, but that seeming is just another interpretation, which again is happening in the context that is beyond that and is always explicitly present. So outside of whatever you think you're trapped in is always explicitly present. You're always manifestly outside of it, no matter what you think you're inside of. Because experience is intrinsic and is in every way intrinsically beyond any particular let's call it framing of it. So yeah, I might have the framing of, okay, right now we're sitting in this room and there's a bunch of people around and we're having a conversation and we're in Huntington and whatever other details you want to add on, as much or as little as you want. So all of that is appearing where?
Well, is appearing in this awareness.
Yes, it's appearing in your experiential field. That's the in. The experiential field is not within in any sense of being contained by all of this, by all of that hypothetical superstructure. You can say they coexist, but the one is small and the other is vast.
And there isn't even an experiential field.
Well, there is an experiential field, but it's not experiential and it's not a field, because that itself is an interpretation. What there is unresolvable.
Undefined.
I mean, you know, you can dodge that problem quite nicely by calling it God or Atman or something, which a lot of approaches do. Because, I mean, that obviously is beyond interpretation, which is an accurate place to put it. You can never say what it is, since it's beyond interpretation. Calling it an experiential field is way too definitive. And yet, what it is what is actually exists that could be referred to by that notion, even though that notion doesn't capture what it actually is.
And non-linear, non-rational intelligence, that's also an invented thing.
It's invented. What the invention is based on indicates it actual. But that it is exactly that is way too much definition of something that's intrinsically unresolvable, undefinable.
There seems to be an urge to try and define.
Sure, of course.
And it's just accepting the undefinable is a good first step.
Well, just seeing that this urge has nothing to do with the thing itself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the urge of mind to appear and to start to categorize and to start to form all these abstractions, to start to classify and start to erect these elaborate interpretive frameworks, is a phenomena within this explicit, actual, obviously undefinability. Any and all phenomena can seem to appear, but none of them resolve into being anything in particular that you can find.
Peter?
Mm-hmm.
So, starting with what Gavin said first,
I don't recall exactly what that was, but we can.
something about going in and out of different states of awareness.
Oh yeah, okay, sure.
So, let's say I'm lost in thought and I'm walking outside.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I sort of wake up and I start seeing what's around me, and oh, there's a tree, you know, and I feel very present. And there's a sense that I woke up from something,
Mm-hmm.
and that I'm now in a better state.
Mm-hmm.
But the most interesting thing about that, which I just figured out from hearing Gavin talk, is that there's an assumption that now what I'm seeing, all the stuff I'm now seeing, was there all along.
Right.
But what you're saying, if I'm understanding, is it wasn't there at all.
Right.
It wasn't there.
Yeah.
There's not a world around me that I'm not noticing. Whatever my state is, that's it.
Yeah.
There's nothing else.
Of course.
And so I have an underlying, very strong assumption, which I've had always, that even if I accept that my experience is just this, I orient toward vision. So I'm in my thinking, my bubble is whatever I'm capable of seeing, not what I'm actually looking at.
Right. But what you're
And that's wrong, isn't it?
what you're capable of seeing that you're not actually seeing is just a hypothesis.
So that's not my experience. This whole room is not my experience. My experience is Pam's toe, because that's what I'm looking at.
Yeah, whatever. Your experience is what your experience is.
Yeah.
And you can't say what it is.
Mhm.
but it's not more than what it is in terms of
Yeah, always
in
thought
terms
it was-
of in terms of its apparition.
Right, I always thought it was more. But
Yeah.
I'm just missing
Well,
something.
You know, I mean, obviously, it's very common, and we're all
Yeah.
steeped in the notion of an objective actuality, which exists there, which is stable, and you know, it's like it's a refrigerator light. You know, when you close the door, the refrigerator light does something. When you close the door, the refrigerator light disappears. There is no refrigerator light until you open the door, and all of a sudden there's a refrigerator light.
But the assumption is the stuff's still there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But if you look closely at that assumption, you'll see it exists in fantasy. It exists in imagination. It does not exist sensorially.
So I think that the other assumption is that, well, somebody that's enlightened has that experience of whatever's there, they're aware of all of it all the time.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
therefore,
they are.
all of this.
They're
all
aware
the time.
of whatever's there all the time. But whatever's there is only whatever's there.
Yeah, not whatever's could possibly.
Yeah.
So that's cool. I mean, that'll help me a lot.
Yeah, I think that's the follow-up assumption is that people who think, oh, so-and-so is enlightened, so I'm gonna listen to them talk and all that, it's something I'm lacking.
Right.
And it's because they're believing an assumption.
Yeah.
Well, there seems to be a difference.
Well, that's an assumption.
Otherwise, why are they saying all this stuff that seems so
What I say,
interesting?
Well,
what
yeah,
I say
Clued in.
is deconstructive of fantasy. That's all. The experience of a so-called realized being and the experience of an unrealized being is exactly the same. The only difference is the realized being knows that they can't know what anything is, and the unrealized being adds. And the unrealized being experiences exactly the same thing. When you were born, you didn't know what anything was, and that never went away. You never have known what anything is, but you become very skilled at being able to play mental games that you were indoctrinated in, I suppose, over the course of your education and so on and so forth. But those playing of games doesn't alter or add to, or for that matter, diminish from the basic condition of cluelessness. So in realization is simply acknowledging the truth of cluelessness. So realization is a lesser condition than unrealization. It's not anything gained. It's just not insisting on piling a whole lot of fantasy on top of it, and then insisting with great investment that it's true.
I thought I was doing good, just sort of acknowledging and sort of believing that wherever I'm not doesn't exist.
Yeah.
But now it's not even, it's way less than that.
Yeah,
It's way less than that.
yeah.
It's not even this whole room here.
Existence is experience. Experience is existence. If you want to know what exists, look at your experience. Nothing else exists in your experience. You can't. How could you find anything other than experience? Where would you look for it?
Newspaper.
Yeah, but the newspaper would have to be in your experience. And when it's not, where's the newspaper? The newspaper is a fantasy until one appears, and then there's a newspaper. And then, you close your eyes or turn your head or leave the room. Where's the newspaper? It's a reality check of what is actual. And the only thing whatsoever that is actual is experience. Anything else is a theory, is a hypothesis, which itself appears within experience, so that itself is also an experience.
Peter, that example of vibing,
Mm-hmm.
Is that like at this? Is that like at the center of the game of social relationships? Right? Like I feel like you get me, or I don't feel that way, or I feel like we're on the same wavelength, or right?
Sure, but what exactly what that is, again, is inscrutable, it's unresolvable. And that it is that way, or that is actually true, is itself unresolvable, because that itself is just an abstraction. But you could say empirically, or arguably, it seems to be. I mean, experience manifestly presents with an infinite range of flavors and textures on all different sorts of bandwidths of density and texture, you know, which we might classify as emotion and sensory and mental and whatever else you want to, you know, vibes and, I mean, whatever. And this incredibly rich panorama of dynamic flavors is what our actual experience and our actual participation in experience consists of. And then what we think is going on and what we think we're doing within what is going on is all just imaginary interpretation of that panorama of this infinite degree of dynamic apparent experiential flavors. So you could say these flavors feel like vibes, and they feel like interpersonal vibes, and it feels like I'm participating in that. Cool, but that whole narration, that whole, well, everything I just said is a hypothesis, and it's unverifiable hypothesis. It's a fine hypothesis, no problem, but it's no more than a hypothesis. But the participating in the sea of experiential flavors is actual and is ongoing and is already happening. I mean, you can't say you're doing it, or you can't say it's happening to you, because that's way too much interpretation. But you are, you know, if there's any doing, the doing is happening, whether it's yours or not, or what have you. So the engagement's already happening. And then all interpretation is based on the ongoing engagement.
I can say I'm doing everything, but that's a lot of interpretation.
Whole lot of interpretations. What do you mean by you? What do you mean by doing? What do you mean by everything? I mean, you know, you're really, you know, you're regurgitating a whole encyclopedia worth of specification that none of which is actually findable.
So then suppose you're sick and you feel lousy.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, that would be a nice thing to still maintain the illusion that there's a world of unsickness that you're going to arrive at.
Sure, but even that you're sick is a partialization of something that's vastly beyond that. Because when you're sick, you're also not sick. And when you're experiencing any, let's say, dominant panorama of flavors, simultaneously present with that is an infinite degree of panoramas of other experiential flavors which are different from that.
Yeah,
So when you're feeling pain, you're also feeling non-pain
That's true.
experience. When you're feeling sick, you're also feeling non-sick experience. When you're feeling clear, you're also feeling unclear experience. When you're feeling unclear, you're also feeling clear. You know, and if you know, the interpretations can't acknowledge that, because interpretations are very, very oversimplifying. Whereas, but experience is not, there's nothing simple about it. Experience is manifestly infinite, it's explicitly infinite. So the range of qualities that are being experienced in an instant, there's no limit to what it is not theoretically, but explicitly, actually.
So then it's worthwhile in a situation like that, it would be worthwhile to make a point of it, looking more closely.
Yeah, look closely or look elsewhere. You know, if you're feeling sick and you're kind of in the mode of zooming into what feels like sickness, you can, if to whatever degree you can experiment with, well, let me zoom in somewhere else and see what I find over there. Or, you know, I have to have a real big pain in my foot. Okay, cool. What's happening over here? Because it's always the case that experience, that there's always more. Whatever qualities of experience, there's always more and other that is simultaneously present, explicitly.
So I know I'm looking at that, so that is not real. That's not here, really. That's in my imagination. The kitchen, let's say.
Yeah, if you can't
If
see
I
it.
decide I'm sick of looking at that, I'd like to explore, I can just go in the kitchen and then that's what's real, right?
Sure, or you're looking at me, and even without shifting your eyes, you can look at what the wall next to you looks like in your peripheral vision. That's also present. Or you can leave the visual field altogether and look at what's going on somewhere outside the visual field. I mean, there's an infinity of apparent experiential real estate.
Well, but even if she's looking at something, and let's call it the kitchen, she may not be seeing the kitchen with her eyes, but there's a visual imagination.
I know, but I'm trying to get away from
that.
that. That's what I'm trying to get
No,
out
but
of.
I mean, that in itself is real. It's the thinking
Sure.
that there's a kitchen and that you're seeing the so-called actual kitchen.
Yeah.
That's imagination.
Yeah.
But it's real imagination.
Yeah, imagination is real. Imagination is actual. It's
Yeah, but I'm
just,
trying to get my head wrapped around the idea that my experience, yeah, imagination is an activity in my experience.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
that's not the same as me sitting here going, there's really a kitchen there.
yeah, there's no kitchen there. Even
Yeah.
when you're looking at it, you don't know there's a kitchen
Right,
there.
even when
Even
in
when
the
you're
kitchen.
standing in it, you don't know there's a kitchen
That's
there.
right.
And that it's a kitchen is a whole universe of hypothesis and theory that's being piled baselessly on the actual experience. I mean, what do you know in your visual field? You know an infinite range of colors and brightnesses and contrasts, apparently, that are all fuzzy edged and unresolvable. You know, if you look at your other sense fields, what you're calling a kitchen, what's actually present there, if anything. And you can look in your mental, I mean, you can look anywhere you want, and if there was a kitchen, it would be a composite of all that information. But then all that information doesn't composite. It doesn't resolve into coherency. Although the mind and the imagination is very, very powerful at being able to pretend it does.
No. Sounds to me like that the crux of the problem here is that there's this belief in this idea that some interpretations or some idea, well, interpretations or imagination, I should say, are not as good as something else that you're not getting somehow.
Which is itself just an imagination.
Just get rid of all this other stuff that you think you're getting, when all of it is simply experiencing.
Yeah.
Where else are you gonna go?
Right. Exactly.
So the kitchen I'm imagining is no different than the kitchen I would be standing in, because
Yeah.
even when I'm standing in the kitchen, it's not the kitchen I think I'm experiencing.
Yeah.
It comes with so much else that's subtle. What subtle meanings kitchens have for me, the notion that you cook in a kitchen, all that stuff that sort of underlying subconsciously. It's unique. It's constantly morphing, so that You know, you walk into the kitchen and it's the riverside for a glass of water, and another time it's the sustenance for food, and but it's you keep believing that it's the same kitchen. So every time you go in the kitchen, you're in it's a unique and momentary experience.
Yeah, experience is always unique
Flash.
in the instant with zero duration and zero consistency with any other apparition. But interpretation denies that and tries to create consistency.
I fall into
And
the
duration.
interpretation that I can go in the kitchen and cook something, and I end up in the kitchen and it burns something. So you see, the kitchen,
So
no,
it
you think
wasn't a
it is.
kitchen after all. It doesn't make food, it makes garbage.
It makes compost. Whereas John walks in the kitchen and he makes something good. What the fuck is up with that? I walk in his kitchen, I probably would still burn.
The trick is to stay in his dining room.
That's it. Exactly. Yeah,
I think I've lost the delusion of delusion.
Yeah,
I can't believe that thing anymore.
the delusion's a complete fantasy.
and
You can't be deluded anymore?
Well, I can't find it.
How could you tell?
It's just imagination, so how can it be deluded? It's just an experience.
You get lost in thought, right?
Yeah,
Or
so,
not?
All the
Yes,
time.
okay.
is that
Exactly,
delusion?
yeah, so,
I don't know, I don't know, but maybe.
but are you really
I don't-
lost?
I don't call it that.
You don't?
No, fine.
So what would delusion be then?
I don't know. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Delusion is based on the idea that there's something to know.
Right.
So you can contrast some state of not knowing that something versus some state of knowing it. And there is nothing to know. But you can know that there's nothing to know. But you can't know it as a knowing that is resolvable.
Mhm.
Let's say you can't find, I forget it, I lost it.
What?
There's an easy test.
There is.
If you find something, then you delude.
That's a good point.
That is good. That's pretty much your litmus test.
Next time I not lose my keys.
That's a good one. I like that.
Well, it's not so much you're deluded, but that's the North Star
Oh,
for
yes.
yoga. If anything seems to be a certain way, if anything seems to be something,
Look again.
look closer, because it isn't. Nothing is anything. And so if anything seems to be something, right there you have a target. So shoot at it, metaphorically speaking,
Mhm.
until there's nothing standing. It doesn't negate anything, it doesn't cancel anything, it doesn't remove anything. But you see, there is nothing to negate or cancel or remove. That would be something.
Seems like there's some kind of a returning that keeps happening. It's just like you all this happens. You go here, there, delusion, whatever, and it just cycles, and then there's this. Oh yeah.
Well, this endlessly seems to depart from itself, and this endlessly never departs from itself. And so that paradox profoundly shapes the way experience seems to be. And it can seem to be this kind of looping like that, a kind of a Mobius strip where you're leaving it and finding it. But it's more of a paradoxical condition that is sort of both at once by degrees that can't be resolved as actually being that. You can't actually resolve particular degrees.
Well, that's part of what the quality of expressiveness of this return is. It's that sense of that it's all the paradoxes are in a kind of balance or something, or
Yeah.
kind of a natural place.
Yeah, the paradoxes don't disrupt anything. The challenge is because the very nature of what this is paradox. Unresolvability, I mean, paradox is another word for unresolvability.
Aaron and I were talking about, but there's a new value in trying to be in a good sort of physical state to maybe have better understanding, like it may be easier to sort of be aware and understand things, and or does it really not matter? Like we're kind of both health nuts, right? So we think
No, well, it actually doesn't matter, but you're free to engage that way and pursue that way to whatever degree that seems doable. And that doesn't matter either. There's anything right or wrong about that, but in terms of recognition, in terms of realization, and there's anything right or wrong about not that, because condition can be the vehicle for discovery. It doesn't have to be a positive condition, or a condition that's being defined as positive. Negative condition is just as valuable and just as useful, or not. Anything whatsoever can be the crossroads for recognition or for delusion.
So is the trap thinking that you feel better or not feel better?
Yeah. Without,
I mean, it's like, yeah.
there's nothing wrong with feeling better, and that's fine. But thinking that feeling better really is feeling better. That's the slippery slope.
Well,
I mean, better is better, but it's not really better. It's just you like it. So defining it as apparently pleasant or apparently desirable.
doesn't,
Because good has an implication of good versus not so good.
Yeah, well, one of the terms you always use is perks, so I was looking at it that way, like there's perks to not eating sugar, for instance.
Sure.
In my
Sure.
experience.
Yeah, I mean, if that works for you, you're free to pursue that.
Just
And
don't
someone
think
else,
that it-
for someone else might think eating a lot of sugar is they like and they're free to pursue that.
Right.
And there's no
It's just what
way.
you decide. So
Yeah.
I decided that, but it just gets tricky because it's an experience. Because I actually,
It's your experience.
yeah,
And your experience is your only plumb line.
right.
right, and each
So
stream
but
has
someone
its own-
else's experience, there's no reason to expect anyone else's experience is remotely like yours.
Oh no, that's not about that.
Yeah,
It's totally about
so-
when I don't eat it
yeah,
or when I do eat it.
Yeah, so if you're drawn this way and instead of that way, so to speak, go for it, why not?
Well,
But exactly what happens or where that leads to is entirely unpredictable, ultimately.
Right. Yeah, I get that part.
But can you choose though? Every stream has its own natural current, so
Yeah.
the very notion that to her, she's just simply identifying or labeling, it feels better not to eat sugar. It just, and in fact, when she doesn't eat sugar, she does physically feel better, but even calling it all of that is just simply the stream of that, the current of that particular stream, and
Sure.
that's just where it naturally goes.
Sure.
So.
Everything is where it
Just the same as
naturally
the person
goes.
who likes the sugar,
Right.
and feels fine with the
Yeah.
sugar.
Everything
Nothing wrong with that.
Everything whatsoever is the complete actualization of the totality of reality. Everything. So if it feels like you're making a choice and you feel better to not eat sugar, and so you don't eat sugar, and then you feel better, that's a narration, a way of describing something that is just the inscrutable flow of reality itself,
Right.
of just the transcendental life force.
Right, it just feels like a noticing. Like,
Yeah.
it's not even so much even a better.
Well, but it's unimportant because since any way you define it at all is inaccurate, trying to split hairs
Yeah.
about whether it really is more
That's-
this or less this is is sort of it's just playing, it's just entertainment.
It is.
But in terms of the
Drinking
doing,
water.
the
What?
participation.
No,
It's
this
like
is good.
breathing water. I mean, there is a point in which you can know that one thing is better than something else.
Not necessarily. Breathing water might be a very, very short path. You want realization, go breathe some water.
Putting a gun here. I mean,
Maybe even shorter. There's only one way to find out, right?
It's the interpretation that's the problem, that's all.
Yeah.
And even the interpretation is within the current of that particular stream, and
Of
so
course.
what?
Of course.
Yeah.
The point isn't what happens. The point is it's possible to see what it is. And then you don't feel entrapped by what you're calling it. So if there's all sorts of interpretation and getting lost in interpretation, the point is not to stop that. The point is to see it, see what it is. That there's all of these, energy phenomena that you can call mentality that seem to have these spontaneous processes that seem to have this flavor that you can call, getting lost in interpretation. It isn't actually that, but you can indicate it by that. And all of that is a spontaneous apparition of actuality, as is everything, because there's nothing else than spontaneous apparition of actuality. And it doesn't have parts, it doesn't have pieces, and it doesn't have better or worse.
You're not trapped by it or deprived of it.
Yeah, there's no such thing as trapped, there's no such thing as deprived, there's no such thing as you. There's just this, which is entirely inscrutable.
It's nice that we have agreements, though, that we all knew to look at our imaginary timepieces and get here at 6, and I could
Or
tell
not.
I could tell someone to go into the kitchen and turn the faucet thusly, and liquid would come out and pour.
Well, maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. But the liquid would come out is a generalization. The particular liquid that would come out and the way it would come out is going to be unique every time you do it. And your actual experience, actuality is not made of generalizations, it's made of specifics. So that water comes out of that tap is a generalization. That every and any time the generalization that you're describing is occurring, it's not actually that, it's actually exactly what it is. Maybe it's a trickle, maybe it's a flow, maybe it flows this way, maybe it flows that way, maybe it splatters, maybe it, maybe it's hot, maybe it's cold, whatever. But the point is that the actual experience will be unique and never, ever precisely repeating. So the generalization has an implication that it does repeat, because the tap, you turn the tap and water's going to come out, unless they shut off the water or something. So that's fine. It's just not describing actuality.
it also,
Which is also fine. There's no rule book that says you have to describe actuality. But for purposes of yoga, for purposes of realization, it is important to become sensitive to the way actuality actually is, in contradistinction to the way we're used to thinking of it as being.
I was gonna say that, well, so I get up in the morning and, I walk down this hallway and I'm gonna go get some coffee or something. And, and then I only have to take my pills and all this stuff. And many times, you know, if I'm, you know, sort of a, you know, just not a really good frame of mind, or maybe I'm still sleepy, and I'll think, oh, I do this every morning, all the time. But then there are some times, and it's happening more and more, is I wake up and I go, oh, look at that, look at that. I mean,
It's fresh.
it's everything is fresher.
Yeah.
You know.
Because it is fresh. You
Yeah,
never,
it is.
every instant, what you're seeing right now, you've never seen before.
Right.
Every
Exactly.
instant, what you're seeing, you've never seen precisely that before.
Yeah.
Why don't we knock off for 10 minutes and have a break?
There's some ice cream in there too.
So we'll be back in about 10 minutes.
Yeah, you're right. Indiana Jones.
Let's see. It says it on there?
Yeah, no, it was.
Oh, yes.
That's
I
what
think I got
That's
that.
right, I remember this.
I think I got it in Disneyland or something.
I remember this one. Dr. Jones, very funny, Dr. Jones. You remember that one with the little Asian guy? Which one was that one?
The second one.
The second one. Yeah. I love those movies.
Yeah. The way I fall asleep is different every time. Oh, I know what you mean. The little fine dots. Yeah, no. This is like in Newsies or something. I know what you mean. I can't tell you what very finely dotted. Threaded.
Yeah, but it's still profitable.
You know the cartoon is Andy. Yeah. I wonder if that's why you got that name.
That's going.
Oh, it's very different. It's top of the morning, man.
Going.
I should never do a baseball cap.
I'll take it home today. I usually stay home.
Kind of puffy. The cap comes down over the head.
Yeah.
Just let the cap brim on it.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Doesn't matter. Doesn't need to. You wouldn't wear one.
Exactly over the ladder. Where? Oh, there it is, yeah. No, sweet tooth. Okay, and every day I have to do. I have not been eating all sweets. This one's not my fault. The president's screen, current of my screen was put in front of my face.
Did you get ice cream?
Yeah, you're not having any?
That's good, what kind is it?
I think it's vanilla.
Well, the prices of sugar or whatever they are to me, and whatever they are to each person is different.
John, after you had your opening, did you go through a bunch of body changes?
No.
None, really? Oh. What were the biggest changes that you noticed?
I stopped believing in things.
Okay. Anything besides that?
That's a lot.
I never thought about that.
Vision?
There's nothing left after that.
Yeah.
How could there be something else?
That was all there was.
That's all there is.
Because I hear these things from other teachers about, oh yes, get enlightened or whatever, and then there's all these changes that happen.
Why do you listen to other teachers?
I don't know. He won't let me hang out with you all the time. You restrict access to you quite a bit. What am I to do?
You would burn up if you had access.
If you listen, if you hear what's being said on one occasion, that's all you need.
Yeah.
It's not a matter of quantity, it's a matter of quality.
Slippery over there. Towels and dryers. Chair.
That whole chair looks a little different.
Yeah.
Didn't feel like it was to you? Answered for you?
Yeah, because
Yeah, because if I hadn't had backgrounds, I never would have done any of this. So yeah, so something really, to me, it was really negative.
Yeah.
Was a push toward doing this.
Hey, Peter, you don't do your own tarot reading or your tarot cards anymore, and you don't do your astrology chart anymore. You don't pay attention to it at all.
Sometimes.
Oh, you do, really?
Sure. It's interesting to see what the current astrological weather is.
Oh,
What happened to Tarot?
Nothing.
Nothing.
so
It's right where it always is.
why did you stop doing it for yourself?
I don't know.
But why would you pay attention to your astrological chart but
I
not
don't
your?
know.
What?
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
He's going with the flow.
Do you remember the last time you did your tarot?
No.
No, somebody did.
Maybe it was because you had like a super fantastic good reading and you don't think you could top it ever.
Every reading is super fantastic, good. There's no bad.
so people on Facebook are posting little talks.
Is there a bad astrological reading?
No, just different flavors.
It's just the variety is amazing.
There's no good or bad.
Some people would like it's spokes.
It's all just energy, and energy is good.
And if you can actually put to the sense what it means. We'll talk about radiance.
So, Peter, okay, I'll wait until after break.
You had it on the record.
Yeah,
One day I'll be able to listen back to all this and think, God, I can't believe how clueless I was.
Or I'll think, wow, that was really smart what I said.
Who
That was
knows?
right on.
Who knows?
Either way, you'll be wrong.
You're such a good dude.
Come on.
The Zen master speaks.
Just the color of the day.
Thank you for the chicken. Thank you for the chicken and rice.
Oh, I think they're I didn't realize. Aaron. It's funny, 'cause I was thinking of, when I picked up the chicken, I was thinking, you know, some coconut. Did you try that brie cheese? It's very good.
I didn't think it had a lot of flavor.
The brie.
Yeah, I didn't have, it was the texture, it was just the texture.
Yeah, it's not a lot of flavor.
Make some little changes. It's been a while since I've been here. I noticed the garage door is really big.
No, it's just.
No, the door to the garage.
Oh, that
hallway.
was, to get.
Yes.
Put in the wheelchair.
That's right.
There's
In the bathroom, you added, yeah, bars, and an extra little thing for shelves. Good. And when is he coming?
Well, I don't know, maybe January.
Yeah.
January.
Will she be coming too?
Is he coming to stay?
I think for a while anyway, yeah. He wants to, do some more rehab with that kind of, it's a Chinese, you know, acupuncture. And they do a lot of rehab for people with strokes, and even people, you know, Westerners who have a ski accident.
Yeah.
And so it's, you know, traditional physical therapy, but then also, they use a lot of acupuncture.
I don't know. Yeah.
Which means, I guess Heather and I are gonna have to drive them down
Where is it?
to San Jose.
Sorry?
San Jose,
Oh, wow. It's a drive.
yeah.
It's a train, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Well, no, he couldn't. Well, he could use Uber or something, but no.
That would be expensive,
Yeah, it would be.
quite expensive.
Compared to San Jose.
Yeah, on an Uber.
It'd be like $100.
Yeah.
One way.
Yeah.
It should have a direct.
Nice. All right.
Like Pavlov's dog, will come in.
Okay,
Okay, I'm glad we decided that.
Are we started? Yeah?
Sure.
Okay. Right, so after your opening when you were 22, there weren't like a bunch of,
Let's not talk about history.
okay,
History only exists in imagination. Talk about what's happening right here, right now. You can ask the same question, just frame it in terms of what's happening right here, right now.
okay. Do you notice anything changing?
I can't say. There seems to be constant change, but I can't be sure that it is change. Because it's always different, but at the same time, it's always just this. So there's no way I can resolve what's going on with that.
But you know it's not the seeming changes were, well, you notice whatever is happening is not the result of a shift in your interpretation. or an idea that you're having.
No. There's no way to determine anything. Everything changes continuously in terms of its apparition, let's say, seemingly. So that being the case, you cannot track apparent portions of what appears, and as they change, try to figure out how they change with relation to how other portions seem to change. Thought is continually changing. Perspective is continually changing. Focus of attention is continually changing. All sensory information is continually changing, and so on and so forth. So how can you possibly pull that together into any kind of coherence to say, oh, this was because of this, or this is any way at all? But you can't really tell what way it is because it's infinitely slippery. So changes in interpretation, changes in perspective, all these can be occurring. But you can't say what any of that is, and you can't say how any of that is, and you can't make any sense in terms of specific navigation because there's no consistency that you can find whatsoever in terms of this happening and that happening. Because since everything is unique and only happens once, every experience only happens exactly the way that it does when it does. And then it's gone forever, it will never come back again. So given that degree of absolute inconsistency, how can you possibly extrapolate, oh, when this happens, then that happens? You have to do a whole lot of imagining and simplifying, which departs from what is actually occurring in order to do that. Because what's actually occurring is not simplifiable. It's not simple, and it's not simplifiable.
I'm going to go one step further and say that while that is true, it is absolutely impossible to interpret what's happening to you from somebody else's reporter's experience.
Huh, yeah.
So
Or even from your own experience.
Sure,
absolutely.
But to look to what did you do 22 years ago, you might as well say, when I get to Mars, I'm going to be on a rock.
Sure.
It doesn't make any sense.
I'm gonna pee next to the rock myself. It might splatter.
There are no rocks on Mars.
I'm into splashing. They don't have rocks on this?
Do they have Mars under rocks?
Just does the P ever hit the rock? That's the other.
That is a big question.
You have to pee when you get them
Can you? But anyhow, it's your experience that you have to look at.
There's nothing else to look at.
Exactly. There's no point trying to extrapolate from what somebody else says about their experience.
Sure. I mean, it's like, for example, if you're in a dream and someone seems to come up to you and seems to tell you something about something that happened to them, how relevant is it? There's no one there. They didn't have an experience, as far as you can tell. And in the waking state, the same thing. There seems to be a shape over there. I can interpret that shape as an objectively existing human system similar to my own that actually has experience, but that's just a theory. I can't know that you experienced. You say you experienced, but the apparition in my dream may say it experiences too. I can't know because I don't have access to that. The only thing that exists is my experience. So that is the field for yogic investigation. And anything more than that, I suppose that other people's experiences is just theories and fantasies that are occurring within my experience.
That's the problem with you. It's all me.
I keep telling them.
I don't see the problem. I'm everything, so nothing's missing.
All right, so like, I do this Alexander technique thing, and they teach me a certain sort of rubric or interpretive frame to look at my experience with, right? So like I'm sitting here and like so I imagine something that I call the spine, right? And it's this sort of it's like, you know, it's like a mental image, right? And then it's also like it's I don't know, again I interpret sensory sensory patterns or something like that, you know, like sensations, right? So if I put that aside, I can say like energetic texture of some kind, right?
Right.
But then like I have a thought like to do less, you know, and to try to relax, you know, right? And then I notice a sort of slight shifting in the energetic texture, right? So it seems like I'm putting forward like an interpretive framework, and then sort of and that's like modifying my experience, right? Like like the interpretive framework of like the image of the spine.
Right. So what about that?
So like I'm always putting forward interpretive framework.
Sure.
But like for you, like the interpretive framework is on the side or something like that.
It's not on the side, it's right where it is. Just like for you. Where's your interpretive framework?
It's imagined, or you know, it's just arising.
Of course.
You know?
But again, it's a small event in a vast continuum, most of which is beyond that, most of which is outside of that context.
Interpretive frameworks is sort of like a working model, that's all. It doesn't do anything, it's like having a blueprint.
Yeah.
It's not the building, it's just a blueprint.
Yeah.
But it's also there.
The important thing to understand about interpretation and imagination is it doesn't refer to anything else than itself. So when you imagine a spine, there's no spine that your imagination actually refers to. The imagining of the spine is the complete event. And then say you feel your finger. So the feeling of your finger is the complete event. It's not about something else. It bears no relationship that's findable to anything else. An infinity of experiential flavors exist, but they don't have any coherence or cross interrelationship with any other apparent flavors that are existing in the instant that is delineatable. There can seem to be infinite degrees of cross-correlation. But if you try to look at what that is and how that is, you know it doesn't resolve into anything. And what you do when you imagine, let's say what happens when you imagine, there's no correspondence at all to what you're describing it as being. I think it is. When you imagine a spine, there's no spines there. You can't say what happens. You're thinking of it as imagining a spine, but that's the only spininess it has. The actuality experientially is completely inscrutable. You can't say what it is. It's possible to see this, and then in that seeing, you become free from entanglement in it, from being stuck in it as an actuality that you have to understand or do anything with or not do anything with or whatever. So you become free to participate in all of these apparent modes without ever becoming entrapped by them because they aren't anything in particular. You get to dance with your fantasy and dance with your interpretation without feeling hemmed in by it or caught up in it. Because you see there's nothing there to get caught up in. It's like a pointless painting. You know, one of those, what's that? Sunday afternoon at the park. Sarat. You know, I don't know if you know that painting, but anyway, it's a painting and, you go up close to it and it's just like, you count this little tiny specks of color. And you stand back and it looks like a bunch of people walking in a park or whatever, let's say. So everything whatsoever is kind of like that. The dots are not connected. There's no people there. There's no part there. It's just little dots. So when you imagine your spine, it's like the people in the park. There's no people, there's no park. It's just little incoherent energy events that are spontaneously occurring that from certain perspectives can seem to be a spine, but in actuality it's just absolute incoherence, inconceivability. It's actual, but you can't say what it is or pin down what it is, and it's certainly not limited to being what you're describing it as being.
Still can hurt like hell.
Sure. But again, the pain is just more dots.
That's right.
The imagination creates the fantasy of continuity, the fantasy of coherence and connectedness. Nothing like that can actually be found and experienced. Manifestly there's a, seeming barrage of an infinity of seemings and implications, where it seems to be this, and it seems to be that, it seems to be a spine, it seems to be an imagining, it seems to be connected to this, and it seems to be connected to that. But none of those seemings, and those seemings, the barrage of seemings, is the basis for fantasies of coherence. But if you look at what is there, none of it is coherent. You can't pin down what these seemings are, just that they are there. So I look at you and it seems that there's hair on your head. But what is that seeming? All that there actually is this experience of, an infinite degrees of shades of color and light and tone in the context of an infinite degree of shades of color and light and tone with no boundaries and no demarcation.
That's the really good thing about tiggies. They just come in without any interpretation, without any meaning, without anything.
Yeah.
They just exist.
Yeah, and you can't find anything else, and you can't find them.
Once you identify them, they change.
Yeah.
So it's just, that's, for me, it's really useful.
Yeah, that's true.
What are tiggies?
The points
All right.
and the pointillism.
What's been really weird is I'm always like, I've been pretty good at like noticing everything disappearing. But just now I was doing everything appearing.
Sure.
But it's nauseating. It's really like, it's hard. It's overwhelming. It's so much. It's much easier to let it.
Well, but the appearing and the disappearing are one. The disappearing isn't really disappearing, and appearing isn't really appearing. The appearing is disappearing, and the disappearing is appearing. That's the strangeness of the instantaneousness of it, and the strangeness of the seeming flow of time. The way patterns seem to appear and instantly morph, instantly change, as conditions change in what we think of as being time.
I don't know if I know how to focus on both simultaneously.
Well, you are, because there's no both. It's just
Right.
this, which is both of that. In other words, neither of those exist as a this and a that. Both of those are just perspectives or ways of seeing
Right.
this that is the way it is.
But
you can't collapse this down to either one of those because it's uncollapsible, it's unresolvable. That's the point.
But it is a different. It's kind of, it's really new for me to see the other hat.
No, it's great to play with it. It's great to play with it. Looking is always good. Just be careful of thinking you've seen how it is.
Oh yeah.
As soon as there's a how it is, I look again.
It just feels like I'm seeing something that I haven't seen before.
Yeah, no, that's great, and that's good looking.
But it's nauseating.
Well, looking should be. Successful noticing should be disturbing. Because you're pulling the rug out from under yourself. You're discovering that things are not the way you have held them to be, and that's because of a lifelong or however long, whatever habit of orienting to things as being a certain way, and all of a sudden it's not like that. It can be threatening. It can be challenging, and so that kind of a sensation is a symptom of good yoga. If it's all comfortable and hunky-dory, you're just playing games with yourself. Which is fine, mind you.
You can also say that abstractions of continuation and generalization come and go also.
Of course.
And they just are the reality that can go.
Of course.
So Peter, and this is, getting back to what I was saying about seeing things fresh.
Mhm.
Um, but, well, almost immediately, and in that same experience, or
Mhm.
field of experience, I start naming it.
Sure, sure.
But, I guess what I've sort of learned is, to sort of suspend belief in the name. And, that keeps things, maybe not quite as fresh, but the flowers haven't died yet.
Yeah, naming and defining is not the opposite of freshness. Freshness is the ever-present context within which all apparent defining occurs.
Yeah.
And defining doesn't successfully define anything, even as it's an ongoing event of the mind. And that ongoing event always occurs in the in the context of the absolutely fresh, absolutely spontaneous and unique undefinability.
Yeah.
And they always coexist.
Defining is fresh.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
So, Peter, you find yourself looking at me, or you finding yourself talking, or find yourself coughing. Right? So, there's just this stuff is arising, and you also find yourself formulating a sense of yourself as um, as something that is experiencing.
Sure.
Yeah.
But none of that is that, even as something indescribable as that occurs. Sure, all eventfulness on all different dimensions occurs spontaneously. So sensory experience is occurring spontaneously, seemingly psychological experiences occurring spontaneously, seeming mental experiences occurring spontaneously, and so on and so forth. But all of that is what it is. It isn't what it seems to be. And what it is cannot be said, and what it seems to be is whatever you say about it or think about it, which does not actually make it that or accurately define what it is. So coughing isn't really coughing, even if it's described as coughing and the mind thinks of it as coughing, and it occurs spontaneously, and the thinking about it and describing, if it occurs spontaneously. But thinking isn't really thinking, and defining isn't really defining. So it's very slippery. Everything is free of being stuck in what it is without needing to be free of anything, because it never was stuck in what it is.
So I can find myself making a small motion with my hand, and then I can notice that changes. Like it's not the whole hand, but it seems to be the finger and or the thumb or something like that. Right? So I can notice these shifts and the thinking that seems to go along with them.
But none of that is any of that, and all of that exists in the context of everything shifting and changing continuously. So even if experientially you seem to focus in on, say, motion of your hand, and you seem to have thought about it, or thought, oh, it seems to be oriented to it, and so on and so forth, all of that is not, what's actually occurring is not, isn't accurately indicated by that description.
So I noticed that, and then like as a yogi, right? So I noticed so, but it could be called a thumb, but the thumb isn't really a thumb. Right?
Well, see the way in which it isn't a thumb. The thumb is, what you're calling a thumb is an arbitrary designation of experience, which cannot be partialized. A thumb is a thumb to the extent you can differentiate a thumb from all non-thumb. And in fact, that can't be done because a thumb, what you call the experience that you can call a thumb, or seem to localize around thumb, is an inextricable, inclusive continuum with all experience. The experience doesn't come with demarcations and borders and separation. Also, what you call a thumb is merely experience. There is no thumb, there's just experience. And you can say experience of a thumb, but then you're putting a thumb there, and there's just experience. The of a thumb is all hypothetical. You might be dreaming and you look down and you see a thumb, but there's no thumb there. You wake up in the morning and you don't need to put the thumb away because it isn't left lying around, left over from the dream. It spontaneously disappears because it was never actually there. And this thumb spontaneously disappears as soon as your attention wanders elsewhere. You go to sleep and your whole body disappears. Where's your thumb then? Where's your personality then? When you start dreaming, maybe there's a new thumb, or a new personality, or a new body. And you wake up and that's gone. And then another new body appears. And you may think of it, oh, it's the same body, but where's the sameness? The experience of it is unique. You never had, when you woke up this morning, the experience you had was, you never had that exact experience before. When you wake up tomorrow, your experience will be different in every particular. So the mind argues that there's continuity and that, oh, it's just your body and it's more or less the same as it was yesterday and tomorrow it's going to be more or less the same. But those abstractions exist only in fantasy. The specifics that experience actually consists of is not like that. It's always unique and it's always precisely the way it is and will never recur in exactly that apparent configuration, let's say.
Is what we're talking about tonight one facet of the truth? That there's more facets to see, like, you hear about unity consciousness, and that there's an unmanifest where nothing's happening, God consciousness.
No, there's only one truth, but it can be describable in all those kinds of terms and as many more others as you want to make up, because it itself is indescribable. So it's possible to see it as nothing, it's possible to see it as everything, it's possible to see it as God, it's possible to see it as consciousness, it's possible to see it as yourself, it's possible to see it as no self. There's infinite ways it can seem to be from the context of different apparent perspectives. But none of those perspectives capture what it actually is.
But I think what I've heard is one of the dangers is getting stuck in one of those perspectives.
Yeah, getting stuck in anything because it's not actually stuck. So basically you're stuck in fantasy. You become a crazy person. It's like getting stuck in thinking you're Napoleon, or thinking you're Charlie Manson, unless you are Charlie Manson. But even if Charlie Manson thinks he's Charlie Manson, he's crazy. For more reasons than one. Not just because Charlie Manson is crazy, but because what Charlie Manson is undefinable. What you are is undefinable. So getting stuck in self-image, getting stuck in a history of your life or a perspective of your life of, oh, I'm such and such has happened to me, and my personality is like this, even in whatever vague or unconscious terms, is equally getting stuck in fantasy, so it's equally basically insanity. Which is fine, there's nothing wrong with that, but that's that's the normal human condition. But yoga says it's possible to see through that. It's possible for discovery to occur of a recognition to occur of what actually is occurring here. At which point you become free of all these partialities, not that they cease to become evident from their respective perspectives, but you see that they are partialities of something that is unpartializable. And you can know that directly and self-verifyingly, which can be called realization.
So what you're saying is like if you get stuck in unity consciousness, then you're stuck there seeing only part.
Yeah, it's a fantasy. Unity
Something
consciousness is a fantasy. Being stuck in one fantasy is like being stuck in another. Being stuck in unity consciousness is like being stuck being a Republican. You know, it's just, you know, one fantasy is as good as another fantasy. Calling one spiritual or calling one political or calling one whatever is just spin doctrine. It's an interpretive framework that only exists in the imagination. And your actual being, your actual experience is intrinsically uninterpretable. You can't say what it is. It can't say what it is. So as soon as you start saying what it is, or let's say as soon as saying what it is starts appearing, that's fantasy. Because it can't be actuality, because actuality is undefinable.
So what you're saying is you're seeing more of a totality of this undefinable experience than just focusing on unity consciousness or just focusing on being total awareness or total or just being.
No, because those are all fantasies. This actuality is not a fantasy, and it's not any particular way. You're always seeing actuality, but you know, your actuality is not some totality that you can miss. You're always seeing it completely. But since it can seem like anything, it's like purely protean. It's like a Rorschach blot. It looks like whatever the mind fantasizes it to be. But the Rorschach blot is not the fantasy. The Rorschach blot is just a blot. So this is kind of like that. This is like a blot. And it's an actual blot, nothing other than it exists. But the mind is exceedingly powerful at being able to partialize it and free associate on it and come up with all of these more or less sophisticated points of view, which can seem to be very internally consistent. You know, the information that's available can seem to support these interpretations, because again, this is just artifacts of the power of the mind. The mind is so powerful at being able to see things a certain way.
So are you saying that someone in unity consciousness is utilizing their mind to interpret everything as being unity consciousness? Therefore, they're stuck that way because they're using their mind.
Sure. Well, they're not in unity consciousness. They think they're in unity consciousness, and then they're interpreting it. So the whole thing is a fabrication. Everyone is always in actuality because there's nowhere else to be. I mean, this is real. This is being. This is actuality, and it's where you are and where you've always been. But as soon as you start thinking of it as, this is this, or this is that, or this is, this is the Bardo, or this is the Dharmakaya, or this is the Atman, or this is whatever, you've narrowed it. Yeah, you've narrowed it, and you've created a caricature of it. You've created an oversimplify, and the way of caricatures occurs by oversimplifying. You go from a 3D Technicolor high definition image to a stick figure.
Well, caricature is also a
Yeah, it exaggerates partiality, sure. But interpretation by its very nature is always essentially a caricature. And what is here is intrinsically uninterpretable. Although again, obviously the mind is very powerful at overlooking that fact and coming up with interpretations, they can seem to be very, very internally consistent.
And like I was saying earlier, useful, because, I mean, it's useful to be able to plug an address into my phone and get here.
Sure, but that usefulness is part of, exists within certain game structures. But it's
Within
not
what?
game structures.
Game?
Yeah, like social participation or social status. I mean, there's all different kinds of different game structures, which are all defined into existence. Oriented to experience in terms of interpretation is fine, and it's what humans seem to be doing, pretty much all the time, pretty much all of us. But it's not what's really happening. And so yoga is penetrating through that veneer for those who are motivated to do so, to discover what is really happening. And then you get access to discovering that you're actually free of the implications of the partializations. You discover you're beyond space and time, for example. You discover you exist eternally, literally, not metaphorically or in some altruistic way. You discover you are everything, again, literally. And you can't see that unless you see it. You can't see it unless you see the way that that's actually so. Otherwise, it's just another fantasy. It's just another game you're playing. And games are fine, but they're not powerful. Reality is much more powerful than games, which is why yoga is powerful. Because you discover what's actually the case, rather than a nice pretense. And most spirituality is pretense. Most spirituality is games people play. They're behavioral. It's behavioral. It's not actual investigation. Buddhists get together and they dress a certain way and you do like this and you bow and you behave a certain, you're a member of the club by behaving a certain way. Or you meditate, sit with your back has to be straight, chin down, back straight and sit and you think of nothing or whatever you think you're doing. But it's a game you're playing. You're pretending to do that. And you're pretending that by doing that, there's some value. You're actually hitting something. And in actuality, none of that's true. But you can't see that none of that's true unless you see what is true, and then you can compare. When you see what's true, then you know what's valuable, and then you can look if any of these other things actually have any value to them. What's true is already true and always true and can't not be true. So it doesn't matter what you do or don't do. And most popular spirituality is oriented around doing something to solve something or get something or lose something or whatever, which is fine again, but it's all just playing games.
Well, isn't it taking away? I mean, you drop away what's not true.
What's not true never drops away. The
Well,
mind
but it's
continually
not
spins
true.
out. The mind continually spins out fantasy.
What I mean is spirituality 101 is to say, hey, you're not a body.
Sure.
That's step one, is to teach people that.
Well, no, what's important is to teach people how to see that. The information is useless. The seeing is powerful. I mean, it'd be possible to give someone the entire syllabus of everything that can be said that is as true as can be stated in words, and they can memorize it and they can regurgitate it and pass a test on it, get A+ and all that, but it wouldn't be powerful It would just be another game they learn to play.
The world expert on honey who's never tasted honey.
Sure, exactly. Whereas seeing what this actually is powerful. It's transformative. It transforms the primal sense of what one is, of what is occurring here, in a way, it can't be said how profound that is. But again, it's only profound when you actually see it. then the profundity of it is revealed. So the important thing is to learn to see it, not the information of approximations of what it consists of or doesn't consist of. So this is why I present yoga. I'm calling it yoga, which is nothing. It's just a code word for investigating what is actually happening here for yourself, not theoretically, but really looking. Well, something's here. What is it? How is it? From a perspective of sort of suspend all preconceptions and really check it out and just apply your intelligence and apply your best, give it your best shots. And if you're fortunate or have a sufficient skill set of any arbitrary degree, you may have recognition. You may see what it actually is more nakedly and more powerfully, which will transform you.
There's an interesting difference in rhythm and momentum and pace of being in your mind, looking at ideas, just having your thought moving, and seeing, being in observation of what's here. It's like you have to slow down to a different pace. It seems that it's different than how the mind works, and it can take a lot of different currents.
But by tuning into it, it shows you what it is, and as that becomes more evident, then naturally it teaches you the way that it is that, in terms of its, whatever degree of rhythms and flows and so on, it actualizes that in terms of, and then that becomes more palpably the the rhythm of experience, so to speak. The mind creates divisions, manufactures divisions and rhythms and process and interaction out of nothing, and hypnotically, self-fulfillingly conveys a sense that things are actually like that, and so it begins to feel somatically that it actually is that way. But of course, it's the way it is, which is completely beyond anything the mind can grasp or manufacture. And it feels the way it actually does, which is immediately obvious and self-verifying. and from its perspective.
Well, there is the tea glaze, or there's the twinkling, or the movement of what seems to be apparent.
Sure.
And then, but then that seems to be the way it is. But you don't know whether that is what you are experiencing because your mind has trained you to, or has incorporated that kind of experience.
Sure.
To
And that's part of it.
manifest that.
And that's part of the actuality, is it's infinitely multidimensional. And from each perspective, it seems to be different. But it's inclusive of any and all apparent dimensions and their implications without actually collapsing down to being that. So it's always this constant barrage of seemings coexisting simultaneously and contradictorily, that we have different degrees of apparent emphasis and coming to the forefront and so on and so forth. But that's just an aspect of what it is, of how it is. It's not one thing, it can't be found as one thing, but it never departs from itself. It never becomes anything else, even though it can't be found as one thing. It's a very strange condition. Well, look at that, it's screening time. Miller time. Margarita time. Margarita.